You have probably been in a room where someone said it and meant it as a compliment. You are so quiet. And you smile because that is what you do when someone names the thing about you they do not understand. But inside, something shifted. Not offense, not embarrassment. Just the familiar recognition that the world keeps treating your silence like a condition when it has always felt more like a preference. Like a place you go. Like a room inside yourself that has better lighting than anything the outside world has offered. Most people treat conversation as the default mode of human connection. Silence is what happens when conversation fails. An awkward gap. A social malfunction. Something to be filled as quickly as possible before discomfort sets in. But for some people, that equation is reversed. Silence is not the absence of connection. It is the purest form of it. And conversation, while useful, often feels like a louder and less efficient version of something they were already doing quietly on their own. This is not shyness. It is not social anxiety. It is not a failure to develop communication skills. It is a fundamentally different relationship with inner experience, and understanding it requires looking not at what these people avoid, but at what they are drawn to. Because people who prefer silence are not running from noise. They are protecting something. A quality of inner life that conversation, by its very nature, tends to interrupt. To understand why some people prefer silence over conversation, you have to start with how the brain processes stimulation, because not every nervous system responds to the same input in the same way. And the difference is not personality, it is wiring. Neuroscience has identified significant variation in how brains manage what is called the arousal threshold. This is the level of external stimulation a nervous system needs to feel engaged without feeling overwhelmed. For some people, that threshold is high. They need movement, sound, interaction, and novelty to feel alert and present. For others, the threshold is low. Their brains reach optimal engagement with far less input. A quiet room, a single thought, a slow afternoon with no agenda. These are not signs of understimulation. They are signs of a system that is already working at capacity. When a person with a low arousal threshold enters a conversation, especially a fast-paced or emotionally dense one, their brain does not just process the words. It processes the tone, the timing, the facial expressions, the subtext, the energy of the other person, and the constant demand to generate a response in real time. All of this registers as stimulation. And for a nervous system that reaches saturation quickly, that stimulation does not feel enriching. It feels expensive. This is the part that most people miss. Silence is not emptiness for these individuals. It is relief. It is the neurological equivalent of setting down something heavy, not because the conversation was bad, but because the act of processing that much social data requires more energy than the outside world assumes. And when the conversation ends, the silence that follows does not feel lonely. It feels like the nervous system is finally being allowed to return to its natural resting state. This is why people who prefer silence often seem calm but tired after social interaction. They are not drained because they are weak. They are drained because their brains were doing significantly more work than anyone in the room realized. And the silence they seek afterward is not withdrawal. It is recovery. And this recovery is not optional. It is not a luxury they indulge when convenient. It is a biological requirement. Just as a muscle that has been working under load needs rest to repair, a nervous system that has been processing dense social input needs quiet to resettle. Without it, the system stays elevated. Attention fragments. Irritability increases. the capacity for patience, creativity, and emotional regulation all begin to decline. Not because the person is fragile, but because their system has been running at full processing power for longer than it was designed to sustain without pause. The silence they seek is not a preference. It is maintenance. There is a second layer to this that goes beyond neurology. People who enjoy silence more than conversation often have an unusually active inner world. And that inner world is not a substitute for the outer one. It is a destination in its own right. When the external environment goes quiet, something inside these people does not shut down. It opens. Thoughts begin to move at their own pace. Ideas connect in ways that conversation rarely allows. Emotions surface without the pressure of being named or explained in real time. The mind enters a state that psychologists associate with the default mode network, the neural system responsible for imagination, self-reflection, memory integration, and the quiet construction of meaning. For people with rich inner lives, silence is not a pause between activities. It is an activity. They are not sitting still and doing nothing. They are thinking deeply, processing recent experiences, replaying and reinterpreting conversations, imagining future possibilities, or simply allowing their emotional landscape to settle into something coherent. This is not idle time. It is some of the most productive cognitive work a brain can do. And it requires exactly the conditions that conversation makes impossible. Uninterrupted internal focus. This is why asking someone who prefers silence what they are thinking about can feel surprisingly intrusive, not because the answer is secret, but because the question itself breaks the very process it is asking about. It is like tapping a person on the shoulder while they are dreaming and asking them to describe the dream. By the time they turn to answer, the dream is already gone. And there is something else about this inner world that is rarely acknowledged. It is not chaotic. It is not anxious rumination dressed up as depth. For people who genuinely prefer silence, the inner landscape is often remarkably organized. Thoughts arrive and are examined. Feelings surface and are allowed to move through without being forced into language prematurely. Problems are turned over slowly, approached from angles that speed would never allow. There is an architecture to this process, a patience, a trust in the mind's ability to reach clarity without external input. And that trust was not learned in conversation. It was learned in silence, practiced in silence, and it remains most accessible in silence. People who prefer silence often discover something that the social world rarely validates: that their deepest experiences of connection do not happen through words. They happen through presence. They know what it feels like to sit with another person and say nothing, and feel closer to them than any conversation could produce. They know the particular warmth of shared silence. Two nervous systems resting in the same space without demand, without performance, without the constant transactional exchange that conversation requires. For them, this is not the failure of communication. It is its highest form. There is a quality to this kind of connection that words actively interfere with. When two people are sitting in comfortable silence, the nervous system is doing something remarkable. It is co-regulating. Heart rates begin to sink. Breathing slows. The body exits the subtle state of alert that conversation requires and enters something closer to rest, not the rest of being alone. The rest of being with someone who does not need you to produce anything in order to justify your presence. That experience, for people who prefer silence, is not a lesser form of intimacy. It is the form of intimacy they trust the most, because it cannot be performed. It cannot be faked. You cannot manufacture the feeling of safe silence with someone. It either exists or it does not. And when it does, it communicates something that no amount of talking can replicate. I am comfortable enough with you to stop trying. And yet, the world does not recognize this. Social norms are built around verbal exchange. Meetings require participation. Relationships are measured by how much you share. Friendships are maintained through talking. And silence, in almost every social context, is interpreted as something that needs to be fixed. Too quiet in a meeting means disengaged. Too quiet at dinner means something is wrong. Too quiet in a relationship means you are withholding. This creates a persistent, low-grade pressure that people who prefer silence carry with them almost everywhere. The pressure to perform engagement they do not feel, to fill space they were comfortable leaving empty, to translate their internal experience into external words, not because it helps them, but because it makes other people more comfortable. Over time, this pressure becomes exhausting, not because they cannot talk. Many of them are articulate, thoughtful, and deeply expressive when they choose to be. But because the demand to be verbal as proof of being present slowly erodes something they value more than expression, their peace. And the exhaustion is compounded by a subtle but persistent self-doubt. When every social environment treats talking as the healthy default, the person who prefers quiet begins to wonder if something is wrong with them, not intellectually. They may understand the neuroscience. They may know their preference is valid. But the body keeps absorbing the message that the world sends day after day. You should be more outgoing. You should speak up more. You should put yourself out there. And that message, repeated across decades of classrooms, workplaces, family dinners, and social gatherings, leaves a residue. A quiet suspicion that the way your mind naturally operates is somehow insufficient. That the richness you experience internally does not count unless it is externalized. And that suspicion, even when it is recognized as false, still costs energy to carry. One of the most misunderstood aspects of people who prefer silence is what they do with conflict, because the assumption from the outside is almost always the same. They are avoiding it. They are shutting down. They are using silence as a weapon. But for many of these people, silence during conflict is not avoidance. It is processing. When emotions escalate and words begin to move faster than thought, their nervous system does something that looks passive, but is actually highly active. It slows down. It pulls inward. It begins sorting through what is being said, what is being felt, what is real, and what is reactive. And that sorting cannot happen at the speed of an argument. This is where the mismatch becomes painful. The person who needs to talk through conflict in order to feel safe interprets the silence as abandonment. The person who needs silence in order to think clearly interprets the pressure to talk as aggression. Neither is wrong, but neither understands what the other's nervous system requires. And without that understanding, silence becomes the battlefield instead of the strategy. People who prefer silence during conflict are not withdrawing their care. They are protecting the quality of their response. They know from experience that words spoken in emotional heat rarely represent what they actually mean. And they would rather wait until clarity arrives than say something that belongs to the moment, but not to the truth. This is not coldness. It is precision, and it is a form of emotional responsibility that the faster-moving world rarely pauses long enough to recognize. What they often wish they could explain but cannot in the heat of the moment is this: I am not leaving this conversation. I am going deeper into it. The silence is not absence. It is the sound of someone taking what you said seriously enough to sit with it instead of batting it back immediately. It is the sound of someone choosing their words carefully because they know that words, once spoken in anger, do not return to the mouth. They land in the other person's body and stay there. And that knowledge, that awareness of what careless language costs, is precisely what keeps them quiet when everything in the room is demanding they speak. There is a quiet cost that people who prefer silence carry and almost never name: the cost of being consistently misread. When you are the person in the room who does not speak first, people fill the space with their own interpretations. You are aloof. You are judgmental. You are not interested. You think you are above this. You do not care. None of these are true. But silence, in a culture that equates volume with value, becomes a screen onto which others project whatever story makes them most comfortable. Over time, this misreading accumulates. It shapes how people approach you. It determines whether you are included, promoted, trusted, or overlooked. It influences how your relationships form and how they fracture. And the cruelest part is that correcting the misread requires the very thing your system finds most costly: more talking, more explaining, more translating your inner experience into external performance so that someone else can finally see what was always there. Many people who prefer silence eventually stop correcting the perception, not because they accept it as true, but because the energy required to constantly explain themselves exceeds the energy they have left after navigating a world that was not designed for the way they process experience. So they carry the misreading quietly. They let people believe what they believe, and they save their real selves for the rare spaces where silence is not a problem to be solved, but a language that is already understood. And this is where a particular kind of loneliness forms. Not the loneliness of having no one around, but the loneliness of being surrounded by people who have never actually met you. Because the version of you that the world interacts with is the translated version, the one who learned to nod at the right moments, to offer a comment when the silence became suspicious, to perform just enough engagement to avoid being labeled as a problem. But the real version, the one that exists in the quiet, the one that thinks in long arcs and feels in deep currents, that version lives mostly unseen. Not hidden out of shame, hidden out of exhaustion, because showing it requires a kind of space that most environments simply do not provide. This is where something important needs to be said. Preferring silence does not mean preferring isolation. These are not the same thing, and confusing them causes real harm. People who prefer silence often want connection as deeply as anyone else. Sometimes more so because they experience it at a depth that requires fewer words and more presence. They are not asking to be left alone forever. They are asking for a different kind of together, one where the space between two people does not need to be filled in order to feel full, where eye contact carries what words cannot, where the relationship breathes instead of performs. When they find this, when they find a person or a small circle that understands the value of quiet company, something remarkable happens. They open. Not loudly, not dramatically, but steadily. They share more because the pressure to share is gone. They speak more freely because the demand to speak has been removed. They become more fully themselves precisely because no one is asking them to be anything other than what they are. This is the paradox that the verbal world rarely grasps. The person who prefers silence often has the most to say. They have been thinking, feeling, processing, and refining their inner experience for years in the quiet. And when the right space appears, when safety is present and performance is absent, what comes out is not small talk. It is depth. It is precision. It is the accumulated clarity of a mind that has been allowed to work at its own pace without interruption. And this is perhaps the most important thing to understand about people who prefer silence. Their quiet is not passive, it is generative. Every hour spent in silence is an hour spent building something internally: understanding, perspective, emotional clarity. The kind of insight that only forms when the mind is given enough uninterrupted time to follow a thought to its natural conclusion, instead of abandoning it halfway through to respond to someone else's. What you are witnessing when you see a quiet person sitting still is not inactivity. It is a mind at full capacity, working on something you cannot see, building something they may never show you, but that shapes every word they eventually choose to speak. The loudest rooms are not always the most connected ones. The busiest conversations are not always the most meaningful. And the person who has said the least may be carrying the most, not because they are withholding, but because they were waiting for a space that could hold what they carry without rushing it, without judging it, without needing it to arrive faster than it naturally moves. If you are this person, there is nothing you need to fix. Your silence is not a limitation. It is a capacity, the ability to be with your own mind without fleeing from it, the ability to observe before reacting, the ability to let a thought complete itself before forcing it into language. These are not deficits, they are skills. And in a world that is becoming louder by the day, they are becoming more necessary, not less. And if you love someone like this, the greatest gift you can offer is not a question. It is space, not distance. Space. The willingness to sit beside them without filling the room. To let them be quiet without interpreting it as absence. To trust that their silence is not empty. It is full of things they will share when the moment is right and the pressure is gone. If this describes something you have always felt but never heard anyone say, you are not alone in it. This channel is built for the quieter truths of the human mind, the ones that live beneath the surface and rarely get spoken because the world keeps moving too fast to listen. If this meant something to you, consider subscribing so you do not miss what comes next. And if you want, leave something in the comments, even a sentence, even a word, because sometimes the quietest people have the most important things to say. And this is a space where that will always be heard. Thank you for watching.